We're live, right? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Today is the second day of the IPOD Debates. We have Year 8 Dragons on the government side and Falcons on the opposition side debating on the topic of this House believes the UN is ineffective. To all you audience members out there, do try to type in all your POIs in the meeting chat, in the stream chat, and we'll do our best to ask them on your behalf to the debaters. We wish all of our debaters the best of luck and may the best house win. Now, we would like to introduce the Prime Minister for Dragons, and we have Jasmine. Jasmine, your speaking time begins now.
Hello, everyone. Today I'll be talking about why the United Nations is an ineffective organization. First and foremost, what is the United Nations? The UN is an organization founded in 1954. They were made to keep world peace, to help countries get along, to improve living conditions for people all over the world, and to make the world a better place. However, there are many issues and controversies about the way the UN is run. The main weakness of the UN includes the Security Council itself, whereby an unanimous vote of 5 permanent members, which are the US, Britain, Russia, France, and China, is required before any action can take place. The biggest problem is that these 5 superpowers rarely hold a common view. This, in turn, results in a deadlock, which means that the UN cannot enforce its peacekeeping initiatives. It cannot get involved in the internal affairs of countries, which results in it not being effective in managing abuses of government and infringement of human rights. Some countries in the world repeatedly go against human rights but are not condemned by the international community. For instance, it allows Saudi Arabia, a country in which women aren't allowed to drive and criminals are beheaded in public, to be head of the UN Human Rights Council. Another example is many nations still fight other nations and within countries. There are still outbreaks of civil wars all over the world. The most recent example of this is in Rwanda. The UN seems to be unable to do anything about this. The United Nations has failed to prevent war and fulfill peacekeeping duties many times throughout its history. Millions of people around the world have been killed and displaced since the UN was founded in 1945. It would seem that the UN's role as a peacekeeping organization is largely symbolic. It has too many weaknesses to be effective, and I think if something in the world happens to cause World War III, the UN would be unable to do much about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Jasmine. We will now move on to your 1 minute of POIs. And your time starts now.
Isn't it good that the Security Council doesn't always agree on one decision made? Wouldn't it stop from one country dominating the Security Council?
Can you repeat the question? Sorry, I couldn't hear.
Wouldn't it be good if there were multiple countries in the Security Council that do not always agree, as it would stop one country dominating the Security Council?
Yes, you need a voting system.
Thank you, Jasmine. Seeing as your POI time has elapsed, we shall now move on to the opposition leader of Falcons. Could we please have Tiffany turn on your camera? All right. Your speaking time begins now.
This House believes that the UN is effective. The UN is an international organization where 51 countries have agreed to maintain international peace and security, developing friendly relations, promoting social progress, and better living and sustaining human rights. Many crucial agencies are under the UN. They include the UN Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, which helps to promote education for all, as well as the World Health Organization and the World Bank. As leader of opposition, my first point is that of the human rights and quality of life that the UN manages to provide us. Virtually every UN body and specialized agency is involved to some degree in the protection of human rights. Human rights are basic rights and freedoms that belong to every person in the world from birth until death. As a status quo, the goals which the UN are working towards include right to education for everyone, further women's empowerment, freedom from poverty, and zero hunger. Most of these goals reach towards helping minorities. I believe that the UN is effective as it was able to create a comprehensive body of human rights law. They have been able to define civil, cultural, economic, political, and social rights. And along with that, they have expanded these laws as to encompass specific standards for women, children, disabled minorities, and vulnerable groups, giving them the protection from discrimination. The UN General Assembly also adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This is a document that acts like a map for freedom and equality. It is known as the base for freedom, justice, and peace. This document still proves its effectiveness after more than 50 years. In conclusion, the UN has and will continue to play a major part in the promotion and protection of human rights. Without the UN, the foundation of human rights wouldn't stand strong. Through implementing laws and freedoms, the UN has provided us all with a better quality of life. I strongly believe that the United Nations was effective in all their efforts and accomplishments. Thank you.
Thank you for your speech. Seeing that your speaking time has elapsed, we shall now move on to your 1 minute of POI time. And that 1 minute begins now.
How is the UN effective if human rights are continually ignored around the world?
It is true that human rights are still being ignored to these days, but we can't ignore the fact that Black Lives Matter, along with women empowerment, have played a big role in society today, with influencers and larger parties standing up for these rights.
Are these policies that the UN creates effective?
I believe that they are effective because they did make a difference in the sense that they have stopped wars in different countries, and they also take in opinions from many different nations, which gives it a wider range of opinions so that the decisions they make are more effective.
Thank you for your speech. Seeing that your speaking and POI time has elapsed, we will now move on to the Deputy Prime Minister of Dragons, Chi-En. Chi-En, could you please turn on your camera? Thank you. Your speaking time of 2 minutes begins now.
Hello, I'm Chi-En, and I'm defending the statements made by Jasmine and stating more facts myself. The United Nations has been long criticized for its lack of involvement in major conflicts and disputes is another reason why it's ineffective. One reason why the United Nations lacks involvement is because of the lack of participation by its developed members, such as the United States, Russia, and China. These countries will usually stay out of conflicts that do not directly involve or benefit them. This goes to show the lack of interest by the Security Council to do anything that is not within their own interests. The United Nations brought in a peacekeeping force who was only there to monitor the situation and help bring in aid. As a result, the United Nations did not classify the situation in Rwanda as a genocide. If the situation in Rwanda was considered a genocide, the United Nations would, by law, intervene. Therefore, 800,000 people were killed in a matter of 100 days. This could have been prevented had the United Nations classified the situation in Rwanda as a genocide and intervened. Also, food prices began rising in 2004, with a particularly steep increase in 2006. The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations forecasts that the world will spend $1,035 billion on food imports in 2008, about $215 billion more in 2007. This will severely strain the budgets of low-income food deficit countries, whose food bills will soar more than 40% in 2008. This may also cause inflation, disrupts the balance of payments, and increase debt for many low-income countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Chi-En, for your speech. Seeing that there are a few seconds left, we will give time for the judges and any audience members to submit their POIs. Okay, seeing that your speaking time of 2 minutes has elapsed, we shall now begin your 1 minute of POIs. And that time begins now.
Surely having an international body to discuss and act is better than not having one, right?
I mean, it is, but they aren't really taking part in it as much.
What do you propose to solve this then?
Um, I'm not sure. Okay. Maybe if they work together more and that Russia, China, and US helped more.
Thank you, Chi-En, for your speech. Seeing that your speaking and POI time has elapsed, we shall now move on to the Deputy Opposition Leader of Falcons. Hong Tian, can you please turn on your camera? Thank you. So, your 2 minutes of speaking time begins now.
Hi, I'm Hong Qian, and today I'm defending for the UN as why the UN is effective. I believe that even though the UN hasn't solved many conflicts during since when it started, I believe it's a start for the UN, as like you cannot change something as fast as we expected. They need time to change everything. However, the UN did stop a lot of some conflicts, like the conflict in Salvador, Guatemala, Mozambique, Namibia, and Tajikistan and Cambodia. These conflicts has been helped and solved by the UN because the UN has been keeping peace in these countries and helping the two sides gain better relationship. The UN has also saved a lot of refugees since the war times in World War II, which helped a lot of children and to get more educations. For example, the UN has assisted more than 34 million refugees and provided food to 90 million people in over 75 countries. The UN has performed numerous humanitarian, environmental, and peacekeeping undertakings. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing that there is still a few seconds left on the clock, we will now let the judges and any audience members to submit their POIs. So seeing that your 2 minutes of speaking time has now elapsed, we'll now move on to your 1 minute of POI time. That time starts now.
You said that the UN needs more time. Is 75 years not a long time to make a difference?
Yes, it is indeed a very, very long time for them to help some countries only. It is a long time, but it isn't long enough for the UN to stop all conflicts. It did stop some conflicts, but not all, which means that 70 years is not long enough for them.
How did the UN stop the genocide in Cambodia?
They help refugees and make relationship between the two sides, and they also raise awareness around the world for people to help them.
Can you give some examples of the UN successes?
They have provided food to 90 million people in over 75 countries, assisting more than 30.
Thank you, Deputy Opposition Leader. We'll now move on to the Dragon Member of Government, seeing that your speaking time has elapsed. Katana, may you please turn on your camera? Thank you. So, your speaking time of 2 minutes starts now.
Good afternoon, I'm Kirtana and I'll be elucidating the points that were made by Jasmine and Chiyun. The UN is often thought to lack any specific moral compass. While its goals at the end of the World War II were clear after the fight against racism and the need to protect and preserve human rights, it has now expanded to become a genuinely global body and has adopted a form of moral relativism in which it tries to be all things to all members. For instance, it allows Saudi Arabia, a country in which women aren't allowed to drive and criminals are beheaded in public, to be the head of UN Human Rights Council. Furthermore, the UN's record of standing up to dictators, condemning human rights violations, and preventing genocides is poor. This demonstrates a lack of moral compass within the UN, proving that it is an outdated and ineffective organization. After the end of the US Vietnam War and the Cambodian Civil War in 1975, the Khmer Rouge regime took control of Cambodia, turning it into a socialist country by using the policy of ultramarxism. The regime carried out genocide between 1975 to 1979, killing more than 2 million people, nearly 25% of the country. The Vietnamese intervention ended genocide by the Khmer Rouge regime. The United Nations recognized the Khmer Rouge regime while ignoring concerns of the human rights violations. One of the UN's goals of ensuring collective security is much more difficult to put into practice than it is in theory. For instance, between 1945 and 1990, during the Cold War, the UN Security Council passed a total of 193 vetoes. As a result of the mistrust between the USA and the USSR, the UN was unable to prevent the US invasions of Vietnam and Grenada and the SSSR invasions of Afghanistan, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia. This supported in the realist view that the UN was ineffective at preventing conflict. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Seeing that there are still a few seconds left on the clock, we will give this time for the judges and audience members to submit their POIs. And seeing that your 2 minutes of speaking time has elapsed, we'll now open the floor to 1 minute of POIs. That time begins now.
What do you suggest the UN could do to be more effective in stopping conflicts?
I believe that the UN could participate more in the problems that have, because as you can see in the Cambodian War, they did not participate much while they ignored the human rights violations, and that killed 2 million people. So I believe that they could participate themselves more.
What do you think they should have done instead? And participate how?
I think they should have, well, maybe they could have.
Thank you, debater. Unfortunately, your 3 minutes have elapsed. We shall now move on to the member of opposition, Hua Sheng. Can you please turn on your camera?
Hello,
right.
my name is.
I'm sorry, let me start the timer. So your 2 minutes of speaking time begins now.
Hello, my name is Hua Sheng, and today I'll be opposing the point of why the UN is not effective. What's the accomplishments of the UN? The UN, one of the accomplishments is the UN have protected and assisted over 59 million refugees. The UN agency, the UNCR, also known as the United Nations Refugee Agency, began in the start of World War II to help the victims of the conflict. When the agency began operations in 1950, it responded to the needs of about 750,000 Palestinian refugees. UNRWA is a direct service provider delivering primary and secondary education, health care, relief and social services, camp infrastructure and improvement to the and emergency aid to the Palestinian refugees. Now numbering about 4.4 million, the UNHCR has helped 134 countries worldwide. The largest portion of staff are based in countries in Asia and Africa, the continents that both host and generate the most refugees and internally displaced people. Many are in isolated locations. The world is currently there is a world food crisis, and the UN Secretary General provided a 3-point plan for attacking the hunger crisis. The first point is you must focus aid on the worst-stricken areas to avoid immediate disaster, to improve social safety nets so children, pregnant women, and breastfeeding mothers, along with other at-risk groups, receive adequate nutrition, and to invest in healthy and sustainable food systems.
Thank you, Farson. Unfortunately, your 2 minutes of speaking time has elapsed. We'll now open the floor to any and all POIs for the duration of 1 minute. That time begins now.
Could the UN be better at stopping people becoming refugees in the first place?
The UN could maybe, well, I don't think the UN could prevent refugees from being refugees directly, because the refugees became what they are because of what the countries did to them, and I don't think the UN can directly intervene in what the country is doing.
Could the UN prevent war between the US and Iran?
They could have, but they're still like...
Thank you, Farson. Unfortunately, your 3 minutes have elapsed. We'll now move on to the final member of the Dragons team, the government whip, Hannah. Could you please turn on your camera? Hannah? Hello, thank you. Your 2 minutes of speaking time begins now.
By all accounts and with all things considered, the UN is ineffective because in its recent years, there have been civil wars in countries such as Yemen, Somalia, Rwanda, Bosnia, and Afghanistan, as well as the nuclear threat in North Syria. The UN often fails to fix these issues. The United Nations have failed to prevent war, fulfill peacekeeping duties many times throughout its history. Thousands of people around the world have been killed and displaced since the UN was founded. 35 years of seemingly getting prepared is quite a lot, and in the result of their fails has caused losses of life which you can't pay back. When the prices of food started rising, the United Nations forecast that the world will spend 1,035 billion on food imports in 2000, about 215 billion more than in 2007. This will severely strain the budgets of low-income food deficit countries, whose food bills will go by more than 40%. This may also cause inflation, disrupt the balance of payments, and increase debts for many low-income countries. The UN has a lot of money for the organization's internal operations and its peacekeeping efforts. The UN is also a charity that people can help and donate money to them. Half of Africa lives under critical poverty, and how is the UN supposed to help if they demand millions of dollars for their help? The UN tries to help, however, they expect an overpriced reward for their help. The UN has failed many times. In conclusion, the utter complete failure of the UN, who have caused the death of thousands, failed to make peace between countries and to prevent wars, is completely ineffective.
Thank you. Considering that we still have a few seconds left, we will now take this time to let the judges and any audience members submit their POIs. All right, seeing that your 2 minutes of speaking time has elapsed, we'll now open the floor to any and all POIs for the duration of 1 minute. That time begins now.
What do you think the job of the UN is? International police or helping people who need their support?
It's um the world will be keep world peace. It's to keep world peace, to help countries get along, to improve living conditions for people all over the world, and to make the world a better place.
You say it's an utter and complete failure. Is there nothing good you can recognize about the UN?
No.
So your group has been talking about stopping wars, but
If you have POI, please write in the meeting chat.
Thank you. Considering that your 1 minute of POI time has elapsed, we'll now move on to the opposition whip and the last member for Falcons, Arthur. Could you please turn on your camera? Thank you. Just as a reminder to all debaters, if you have any POIs, please do type them out in the meeting chat during the 2 minutes of speaking time, and our moderators will help you voice out your POIs. Okay, your 2 minutes of speaking time begins now.
the UN might not have stopped some wars or things that they have accidentally overlooked, but they have brought us together through reducing poverty and helping people in desperate need have a better life. By doing this, people can trust and build up trust. And if they build up trust, they will not have anything to hate each other on, and therefore the world could, in the end, achieve peace. Most people say that 75 years is not enough. It has been quite a long time, but I think it's not enough. The world has been evolving for a very, very long time, and it's only been now that we are starting wars. If it takes so long to build up for the hatred, then why does it have to take so little to stop it? I think that by building a relationship between each other, we can not stop wars by force laws and critical punishments, but by making everybody think not about hurting each other and more to helping each other. This way, the UN has been successful because of its ways of answering to the needs of the people that need help, like responding to cries. And for refugees, by assisting them, they have made them feel a bit safer. And by knowing that the world has been safer, they can assist other refugees to find a better place in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, opposition whip. Considering that your 2 minutes of speaking time has elapsed, we'll now move on to your 1 minute of POIs. And that time begins now.
How long do you think the UN is going to take before it can reach its true potential to solve all world problems?
Well, it's very hard to say now, but by achieving happiness throughout the nation, it could be done in maybe another 15 years.
Many of the UN's failures have resulted in the deaths of innocent people. Do you think the UN should still continue operating if this is so? What do you think?
Well, even if the UN had not existed, these would have happened. And by learning from their mistakes and finding out what people think is a genocide or murder or not, they could improve and try to not have other incidents like this happen again.
Thank you. Now, the first round of the debates between Dragons and Falcons has officially ended. We want to thank both We want to thank all debaters from Dragons and Falcons for giving such exciting and invigorating speeches. And to all you audience members out there, the next round of debates between Tigers as government and Phoenix as opposition will be coming your way soon. Thank you, and we'll see you in a few minutes. Thank you to the audience for your kind patience. We are now back and you should be able to hear the audio as well as they. We'll now restart the debate with our Tiger Prime Minister Shayna. Your 2 minute speaking time, your 2 minutes, wait, so sorry. Your 2 minute speaking time begins now.
Good afternoon to all the judges and audience. I'm Shayna, the Prime Minister, and I'm here to say that the government believes that the UN is ineffective. UN with its peacekeeping mission is a scam. It's just an institution for the white race to reap Africa and other undeveloped nations. One of the largest examples is when Rwanda genocide happened. They sat back and watched hundreds of thousands die, abandoning all of them as the brutal and horrific violence go on. The UN troops has been in Rwanda since 1993 to maintain peace between rebels, the Tutsis, and government, the Hutus. The UN forces were to assist in disarmament and pave way for transitional government, but nothing went as it was planned and war broke out in process of peacekeeping. The genocide in Rwanda is perhaps one of the most intensive killing campaigns to take place in human history after the Second World War. Then, on April 6, 1994, the Rwandan president's plane was shot down. This set in motion the vicious genocide extremists within the Hutu population began assassinating moderate government officials and ultimately claiming the lives of more than 800,000 Rwandan Tutsis and moderate Hutus. They also raped nearly 250,000 women in Rwanda within the community, even the sightless, to stop the offense. Some of the great world powers, such as the United States and the United Nations, could have at least stopped the broadcast of the incidents, if at all they weren't able to use the military forces to stop the genocide. There's nothing about the UN not wanting to save the people that were in Rwanda genocide, but the United Nations is not built to tackle genocide crisis efficiently. The United Nations was not able to successfully intervene in a Rwanda genocide since it lacked proper view or objective of the crisis, supplies, funds, and skills necessary to intercept. Not only that, but it ignored a lot of warnings before the war and relied very much on the precedents. Thank you.
Thank you for your speech. We'll now give the remaining time for the judges and any audience members to submit their POIs. Seeing that your speaking time has elapsed, we'll now move on to 1 minute of POIs, and that time begins now.
The UN did not cause the Rwandan genocide. It was arguably a product of colonial divide and rule tactics. Are you attributing too much of the blame for this to the UN?
Well, they were peacekeepers, so they should have done something, but they didn't do anything, and they watched them get raped and get killed. They should have tried to at least do something. I'm not putting like the whole blame on them, but they should try and help the Rwanda. But they didn't. They just sat back and watched.
How can you call the UN utterly useless when it conducts mass donations to crises like the Yemen crisis during COVID-19?
I didn't call them utterly useless because they have done some great things, but peacekeeping wise, they didn't really do a great job on it. And they have done a lot of great jobs. I'm not saying anything about that, but yeah.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Seeing that your 3 minutes has elapsed, we'll now move on to the Leader of Opposition from Phoenix, Zila. Zila, could you please turn on your camera? All right, thank you. We will now begin your 2 minutes of speaking time, and that time begins now.
Good afternoon. We strongly disagree that the United Nations is ineffective for many reasons. Before I continue, I have two things I want to mention. I want to point out that we are arguing about effectiveness today. Effectiveness is the key word. We define effectiveness as the ability to produce results. Secondly, I believe one of the Prime Minister's points is invalid because the UN did send a team to aid the Rwandan genocide. They just failed. The UN itself cannot be blamed for the failure of the teams they send in to aid. Now, one of the reasons why the UN is effective is their active role in the aiding of refugees. They have created the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, an organization that has been running for almost 70 whole years, assisting refugees in more than 100 countries. The budget for the UNHCR in 2019 was $8.6 billion US, which was invested in healthcare, education, food, and drink for 20 million refugees. UNHCR promotes 3 durable situations for refugees as part of its core mandate: voluntary repatriation, local integration, and resettlement. Migration schemes have also been used to broaden the protection space for refugees in states that are not party to the 1951 Convention. Another job of the UNHCR is to make sure that European countries keep up with the needs of refugees in their country. This ensures that every country in the European Union is doing their part in aiding refugees in need. Refugees are regarded as a global issue. That is what the UN aims to do: solve global issues, which is in accordance with one of the 4 aims: achieve international cooperation in solving international problems. How can you argue that an organization is ineffective when it is doing what it is meant to do year after year? Thank you.
Thank you, Leader of Opposition. We will now move on to your 1 minute of POIs, seeing that your 2 minute speaking time has elapsed. And that time begins now.
How can the UN guarantee that the money donated to them is directly funded to projects that help other people?
While it is true that we have no way to detect that they are actually using this money to help people, we can be quite sure because there is quite a lot of content coming out, pictures of them doing their missions, etc.
Thank you, Leader of Opposition. Seeing that your 3 minutes has elapsed, we will now move on to the Deputy Prime Minister from Tigers, Emily. Just as a reminder to all debaters, you can type your POIs out in the chat whilst the speaker is speaking. That way we can get through more POIs quicker. All right, Emily, could you turn on your camera, please? Thank you. And your 2 minutes of speaking time begins now.
Dear judges and attendees, as covered by the first speaker, the Rwanda genocide is a disastrous and tragic example of how the peacekeeping agreement just doesn't work. To carry on, I'm going to be talking about UNICEF, a children's fund run by the United Nations and set up with the very noble objectives of improving children's welfare. All very well. However, we just have to look at the recent atrocities in the African Republic where UNICEF failed to protect children who alleged that they were raped and abused by the very same people sent to protect them, the UN peacekeepers. UNICEF was specifically highlighted as one agency that looked the other way when allegations first surfaced, preferring to concentrate on protocols rather than action. Even the UN Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon, expressed, I quote, profound regret that these children were betrayed by the very same people sent to protect them. So much for protecting the welfare of children. We also contend that UNICEF operates on ideals rather than practical realities, especially on the topic of adoption. UNICEF insists that an orphan's home should be within their own home country and cultural heritage. Yes, we all agree with this in an ideal world, but how does this help the thousands of babies orphaned in these war-torn countries? Too many children are being left in these orphanages when metal crypts that house them and little stimulation from another human being. There's enough research out there to prove the devastating effect that the lack of physical touch has on a baby's brain and psychological development. I ask you, how does this protect a child's welfare? Also, this is an increasingly globalized world, with many multicultural communities growing and with many diverse cultures scattered across the globe. To conclude, UNICEF is probably the best advertisement for the United Nations, yet it is still not delivering what it set out to do. Its recent controversies and continuing hard stance on adoption only goes further to demonstrate the ineffectiveness of the United Nations. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now move on to 1 minute of POIs, and that time starts now.
Can you provide the source that says African children were raped by the people sent by UNICEF?
Well, these children wouldn't call out soldiers if they weren't helping them. They would, of course, be angry and scared if they had raped children less than 8 years old. Also, this problem was brought to the attention of many global news sites, such as Guardian and BBC, and even the Secretary of the UN apologized for this terrible crime against their own rights.
Are you saying that the world would be fine without the UN?
I'm not saying that the world will be fine without the UN. The UN has definitely done some very, it definitely promotes very loyal noble and loyal objectives, but in the same time, it has to improve on basic things like monitoring the UNICEF soldiers and updating the
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. Unfortunately, your 3 minutes have elapsed. We'll now move on to the Deputy Opposition Leader of Phoenix, Zara. Hi, Zara. Your 2 minutes of speaking time begins now.
Failure of the League of Nations led to the development of the United Nations, as the League of Nations generally lacked the funds to do anything, and important world powers like the US were not part of the League. On the other hand, the United Nations had the funds, and they had all the important countries which had power to influence and sway other countries' opinion. During the Cold War, North Korea invaded South Korea, displaying how communist Russia tried to turn South Korea communist as well. The UN was quick to react to this situation and introduced Resolution 83, drawing a border between North and South Korea, showing how they took immediate action to restore international peace so Stalin wouldn't have the means to achieve world domination, while the world was in a period where they were supposed to be cooperating with each other. This helped contribute to how the world prevented another Hitler incident from happening, taking necessary measures to avert from a Third World War. They were able to acquire peace during the Cold War, where clashes between communism and capitalism were imminent, securing an armistice that ended all hostilities. Therefore, the UN is effective because they are quick to react in restoring world peace in international conflicts like the League of Nations.
Thank you. Seeing that you ended your speech early, we'll now give some of this time for the judges and any and all audience members to submit their POIs. All right, we will now begin your 1 minute of POIs, and that begins now.
The Korean War lasted 3 years and caused millions of deaths, as well as leaving Korea divided still, even to this day. How could the UN have been more effective?
Well, you see, MacArthur was the one to blame for that reason, because he overextended and caused many deaths. And
in areas where war is already going on, how would you solve it with only diplomacy and no action?
well, you see,
Thank you, Deputy Leader of Opposition. Unfortunately, your 3 minutes have elapsed. We'll now move on to the Member of Government from Tigers, Tanishka. Thank you. Your 2 minutes speaking time begins now.
I'm sorry. Okay. No one can deny that UN does have a few flaws in the way they do things. They have failed in the doing things that they were supposed to be done and have not always managed in keeping peace in many countries. For example, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is an ongoing struggle between Israelis and Palestinians that began in the mid-20th century. Various attempts have been made to resolve the conflicts as part of Israeli-Palestinian peace process, but none has worked. Even after the Palestinians and the Israelis verbalized the importance of the situation, the UN just ignored it, hoping that it would stop after some time. This was obviously mistaken as the war is still going on to this day. This is way too long drawn and has killed thousands and thousands of people. Instead of giving them making peace between both countries, giving them equal land and rights, the UN decided to support only one side. Furthermore, this breaks the UN rules and only helped in extending the war as the Palestinians were not contended. Today, the Israeli controls 85% of historic Palestine, also imposes a crippling block on Gaza, and continues its construction of illegal settlements on occupied lands in defiance of many UN resolutions. The United States has also used its veto power several times to counter the UN Security Council resolutions and commended Israel's use of force against Palestinian civilians. Also adding to that, UN peacekeeping missions have their flaws and problems. That is a fact that no one can deny. The organization is weakened by administrative problems and crimes committed during the missions, which cannot be excused. The task of resolving these issues should be taken seriously. Nevertheless, in most conflicts, international intervention is necessary to bring the matter to the least damaging end possible. I'm going to end by saying that the things that UN has done to solve problems are not always the best and can sometimes be very ineffective to what is happening. In order for it to work, it needs to be updated and more effective. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now use this time to let the judges and any audience members submit their POIs. Seeing that your 2-minute speaking time has elapsed, we'll now move on to your 1 minute of POIs. And that time begins now.
Israel and Palestine have refused assistance from the UN during this conflict. What do you have to say to this?
Well, they have actually recently they have asked the help of UN. There is actually a talk when the Israeli president gave this speech about how this war has been too long drawn and that it should stop and that everyone should have equal rights and land. So yeah, they did ask for help after some time.
What has done since then? What has been done since then?
Not much. That's why UN has not done that much things to really stop it.
How do you suggest the UN becomes better and more effective then?
Probably maybe their resolutions and values are pretty underrated.
Thank you, member of government. Unfortunately, your 3 minutes have elapsed, and we'll now move on to the member of opposition from Phoenix, Purna. Could you please turn on your camera? Thank you. Your 2 minutes of speaking time begins now.
As the Leader of Opposition and Deputy Opposition Leader have said, the UN is effective in many different ways of saving the lives of many innocent people. The statement the UN is ineffective is false, as without their achievements, the current peace in our world wouldn't even exist. To back up my point, the UN is providing food to 90 billion people in over 75 countries, assisting more than 34 million refugees, authorizing 71 international peacekeeping missions, working with 140 nations to minimize climate change, assisting about 50 countries per year with their elections, and many more accomplishments listed in their official site. Not to mention, the World Health Organization, which is part of the UN, has played an active role in the advancement today in medicines and prolonging of human lifespan throughout the 19th century till today. The WHO has made groundbreaking discoveries as they eradicated all traces of smallpox, developed medicine to fight deadly diseases like leprosy and malaria, and made the entire world aware of the severity of the effects of COVID-19, so countries could take preventive measures to protect us. They collect statistical data from 40 countries every year and spread good health practices. The UN has also connected 193 countries as of today, successfully encouraging globalization and establishing international relations, continuously keeping the world globally interconnected and internationally minded. They clearly are able to fulfill their cause, so we strongly believe the statement, the UN is ineffective, is false.
Thank you. We'll now allow some of your remaining speaking time to be used by the judges and any and all audience members to submit their POIs. All right, seeing that your speaking time has almost elapsed, we will now move on to your 1 minute of POIs, and that begins now.
What do empty words and documents do to help children and others fearing for their lives and dying in the countries?
Could you repeat the question? I couldn't hear.
What do empty words and documents do to help children dying in their own countries, fearing their lives every day?
The words, I'm saying what they did. They actually are, the UN is actually doing things. I'm just telling you what they are doing.
Can you give examples of what they're doing?
They're saving the lives of many people.
Thank you. Unfortunately, your 3 minutes have elapsed, and we'll now move on to the final speaker from Tigers, the government whip, Ian. Thank you. And your 2 minutes of speaking time begins now.
Why is the UN ineffective? The UN is ineffective because of its own Security Council. Its structure has been compromised or weakened because the Security Council is involved in important global issues, but now it does not involve itself in these world matters when it is supposed to be involved. It is outdated and has not updated their policy, so they are not equipped to the modern day world politics. All the power belongs to 5 main countries in the UN, which are China, US, UK, Russia, and France. When a solution has been made, these countries always make a war between themselves because they veto the decision to their liking or to their allies. Why is the UN ineffective again, I ask? It is because of the Security Council. The 5 powers and their power to abuse the decision by vetoing it to another country. They should abolish vetoing or not veto in important situations or world affairs. If they had abolished vetoing, they'd be very effective in world affairs. They are ineffective because they commit crimes when they try to keep the peace, which shows that they do not take these matters very seriously. Let me give you a few incidents that happened because of this. Rwanda genocide happened because the UN did not send in peacekeepers and can only shoot when shot at as an act of self-defense, and the killers did not shoot at the peacekeepers. Israeli occupation, on the other hand, is because the UN put a Jewish people into Palestine when it was given to country, but then Russia vetoed that decision to Israel. The Israeli people thought it was an insult to give a country to Israel people, but then got a country full of Jewish people. So the Israel people grouped together to kill the Jewish people. So my last statement is this: the UN keep the peace, but in doing so, they also make crimes which do not keep the peace.
Thank you. Seeing that your 2 minutes of speaking time has elapsed, we'll now move on to the final minute of POIs. And that time begins now.
The Security Council's veto system is actually not terrible. If for whatever reason Russia, US, UK, and France were to adopt a notion that would hurt China, wouldn't this veto that China had help them, and wouldn't this prevent any conflict? What do you say to this?
So you see, just now, as I said, yes, the 5 powers, when the Security Council has made a decision about nuking a country, as you see just now, say Russia, US, UK, and France wanted to nuke China with that decision. This is why vetoing it should be abolished, because you see, as Zealand has just stated, if they vetoed they vetoed the decision to China, China will no longer be here, as they would have set a nuke on one of their own nations in the UN.
Thank you, Government Whip. Seeing that 3 minutes has elapsed, we'll now move on to the final speaker of the day, the Opposition Whip from Phoenix, Shahishia. Thank you. And your 2 minutes of speaking time begins now.
Who is working with those main countries mentioned by the government whip, like China, and is looking for a way to solve the pandemic? How does that show that the UN isn't involved? As the opposition whip, I conclude that the UN has supported many people and countries ever since they became a world institution. First, I want to talk about the four main goals and what they've achieved out of them. The UN has definitely achieved providing food for 90 million people in 75 countries, helping 50 countries per year with elections, and providing vaccinations for 58% of children in the world. We can achieve international cooperation in solving international problems off their list of objectives. Quantitative studies of United Nations peace operations generally conclude that they are effective. 3 of the peace operations studied by the EPON so far, the African Union mission in Somalia, the UN mission in the DRC, and the UN mission in Mali, have made significant contributions to preventing major civil wars and large-scale conflict. A broad range of stakeholder communities in the DRC, Mali, and Somalia agree the level of violent conflict in these countries would have been significantly worse if these peace operations were not present. As for the last and final goal, the UN has developed international relations from sustainable development, environment and refugees protection, disaster relief, counterterrorism, disarmament, and non-proliferation, promoting human rights, gender equality, and the advancement of women governance, economic, social development, international health, and expanding the food production. Thus, the UN is effective. Thank you.
Thank you, Opposition Whip. Seeing that you still have a bit of time left, we'll now use this time to let judges and any audience members to submit their POIs. All right, seeing that your 2 minutes speaking time has elapsed, we'll now move on to the final minute of POIs. And that begins now.
But in war-torn countries, what would happen if the enemies don't fight back? The countries in war wouldn't listen to peaceful protests.
Well, then it is not really the UN's choice. Then wait, can you repeat the second part of the question?
The countries in war wouldn't listen to peaceful protests.
Oh, then the UN will resort to violence, not violence coming back.
Thank you, Opposition Whip. Unfortunately, your 3 minutes have elapsed, and that concludes our Year 8 debate on the topic of this House believes that the UN is ineffective. We would like to thank all our debaters for engaging us with such exciting and interesting speeches, and we want to thank all the audience members watching for your patience and your continued support of the IPOD debates. And don't forget to tune in tomorrow when we have the Year 7 debate on the topic of this House believes all schoolwork and resources should be digitalized. That is happening again tomorrow at 3 p.m. Do tune in. And we'd like to thank all our judges for their hard work and spending their time to listen to all the amazing debates. Thank you everyone for your cooperation, and we hope to see you again tomorrow.